All right, I'm going to show you right off the picture. Right away. This is the section on Melissa's early life. After Melissa finished her public school education, she studied telegraphy under Joshua Rogerson and was a telegraph operator at the time of her marriage. She had her share of outdoor fun too. She was active, lively, and possessed good coordination. She could walk fences with the best of them, and often said she had never found a tree she couldn't climb. Like the other pioneers, she learned to dance at an early age and enjoyed dancing for many years. She had grown up to be a slender, blue-eyed girl, about 5 feet 5 inches tall. She had rich brown hair, which in later life became almost black, and even at the time of her death was more dark than gray. It was thick and long and had a natural high sheen to it. Her husband was to tell her later that her hair was as well as her spelling made him notice her. She was gentle, somewhat shy, and very proud, but with never a hint of arrogance in her pride. Harshness, rudeness, and cruelty were completely foreign to her nature. She was honest in minutest detail, sincere and good, and expected goodness in others. She had her share of admirers. When she was 16, a young man of the town, Morgan Richards by name, came to her and said he would like to take her to the season's lecture course if she would buy her own ticket. He was earning money for his ticket, but would not have enough for two. He suggested that perhaps she could earn enough for herself, and they could go together. He was a trim, well-respected youth, and she wanted to go with him. She would try to earn the money. She mentioned it to her mother in the presence of a neighbor. The neighbor wanted to cooperate. So she hired Lizzie. Okay, so that I think was the first time you heard me say Lissy. And I think that they called her that for her nickname. That was Sarah Melissa turned to Lissy now. So she hired Lissy to knit lace for window curtains. The lace was 5 yards long, about 2 or 3 inches wide, and was knitted out of common spool thread. She received $5. $5 for it, the price of the ticket. She bought her ticket, Morgan bought his, and they attended the lectures together that winter. For some unknown reason, the romance did not blossom. A new interest came into her life when a young Civil War veteran from Maine took notice of her. She first met him when, on a Sunday morning, she called for her friend Maria Louisa Combs to go to Sunday school. Maria had been north with her brother for some time, and this was her first Sunday home. Melissa told her that there were some good-looking young men in town, and that they should meet them. After Sunday school, the girls went to the home of one of Maria's brothers, and there they met the strange young men. Their names were Lorenzo Watson, Frank Westbrook, Frank Morris, and Cocky Martin. Melissa thought that Lorenzo Watson and Frank Westbrook were two of the handsomest men she had ever seen. That winter, Lorenzo Dow Watson was her school teacher. He was very challenging and an interesting and exciting friend whom she enjoyed being with. She respected and admired his keen mind and had a great admiration for him. He had much to offer this petite Miss Clark, standing 6 feet tall, chiseled features, and a shock of medium light, wavy hair. He was a classic example of splendid manhood. He was well educated, had acquired poise and good manners from his strict New England background, and was very charming, not one to be turned down easily. As the months flew by, there were so much they were so much attracted to each other that soon their mutual interests ripened into love. Melissa was not quite 20 years old, and so it came about that Lorenzo Dow Watson and Sarah Melissa Clark, the soldier school teacher and the pioneer girl, 6 years his junior, were married in Parowan, Utah, May 31st, 1871. They stood together and recited their vows in the parlor of the Clark home, surrounded by Melissa's family. Jesse Nathaniel Smith, a Mormon elder, joined the two in marriage. The witnesses to their marriage were Daniel P. Clark, I'm pretty sure that's her dad, and Frank Westbrook. That's Lorenzo's friend. You will remember the name of Frank Westbrook. He is one of the soldiers who joined Watson at Camp Caddy and went with him to Parowan. He there married and settled, but was later killed in an explosion at the lumber mill in Parowan Mountains. Mary Brown Anderson, a teenager at the time of the marriage, said to me, "Your father had a charming personality, and your mother was very beautiful." Everyone considered it to be a real love match. How strange that they would meet and marry in Parowan, Utah, for Watson was born less than 100 miles inland from the Atlantic Ocean in the state of Maine, and Melissa was born less than 100 miles inland from the Pacific Ocean in the Cajun Pass, San Bernardino County, California. For it was not in a hospital, not even in a house, but in a covered wagon under a sycamore tree that Sarah Melissa Clark made her entrance into mortal life. She was born July 23rd, 1851, to Daniel Porter Clark and Sarah Melissa Hakes in the Cajun Pass in what was then Los Angeles County, but later, by an act for dividing the county of Los Angeles and making a new county therefrom, to be called San Bernardino County. The covered wagon had been the home of the parents for 3 long, weary months as they made their way, with the company of immigrants, 437 persons in all, across the barren wastes of Utah, Nevada, and into California to establish a colony in Southern California. In the Cajun Pass, where the company had camped, the sycamore, with its broad, pronged leaves, provided relief from the blazing sun and dust-choked miles of the desert, and the young mother was grateful for the respite and the relative comfort of this shelter as she welcomed her third child and her first daughter, Sarah Melissa. The father, Daniel Porter Clark, was born in Onondaga County, New York, the son of Russell Kilburn Clark and Elizabeth Towin. The mother, Sarah Melissa Hakes, was born in Canaan, Columbia County, New York, the daughter of Whedon Vender Hakes and Eliza Amanda Beebe. They were converts to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and had traveled with the Saints of Utah in Willard Richards' company in 1848. The journey to California was the beginning of another chapter in their colonization efforts. While Jefferson Hunt was still a captain in the service of his country, the Mormon Battalion, he had written to Brigham Young, promoting the idea of establishing a Latter-day Saint colony in Southern California. He was of the opinion that the Mormon Church should have an outfitting post for saints coming by wagon from the east and for others coming from the islands of the Pacific. At first, Brigham Young was opposed to the idea, but later he called for volunteers to establish a colony. President Young expected and desired a party of approximately 50 men to volunteer for this mission. Great was his surprise and deep his consternation when 500 expressed a desire to go to California. President Young called and set apart 2 apostles, Amasa. I don't know how people say it. I've been corrected a couple of times, and Amasa Mason Lyman and Charles Colton Rich as special missionaries of this project. These men immediately effected an organization of 3 companies, naming as pilots Captain Jefferson Hunt, Captain David Seeley, and Captain Andrew Lytle. The colonists were charged with the responsibility of living their religion. They were to establish a city, plant orchards, sow grain, and become a self-sustaining unit of the church. So my grandmother, that this Melissa is her grandmother. Yes, she grew up a Lyman. So this Amasa Lyman is a grandfather on the other side of people. So these people kind of knew each other. It was great. And we'll get to them later. So I'm going to carry on with this story. Daniel Porter Clark was one of the volunteers for this project. That's Lissa's daddy. And one of the few chosen to make advanced preparations for the trip. On April 8, 1849, he, Amasa M. Lyman, and O. Porter Rockwell, and others left their families behind in Utah and started for California to buy land and lay the groundwork for a settlement. Daniel Porter Clark and his wife and second son, Edgar Leonidas, their first son, Daniel Whedon, had died in infancy in winter quarters. were living in Cottonwood in Salt Lake at that time. Some progress was made toward laying the groundwork for this colonization effort in California, after which Daniel Porter and the others returned to Utah, arriving in the Salt Lake Valley September 18, 1850. They immediately plunged into the more difficult business of preparing for the long journey back to California with their families and the rest of the company. This pilgrimage began in the spring of 1851 and lasted through most of the long, hot summer. However, this journey, with its attendant hardships, was not a new experience for the Clarks, for they had been among those to make the westward trek from Illinois. After having suffered extreme persecution along with the rest of the saints in Nauvoo, they had left that fair city in February 1846, crossing the Mississippi River on the ice and heading into the bleak, unknown west. On August 26th of 1846, they arrived at what was to be known as winter quarters, where Daniel Porter and his wife were to remain for nearly 2 years. Here their first 2 sons were born, the elder of whom lived only about a month. They left winter quarters June 29, 1848, and arrived in the valley of Great Salt Lake, October 17, 1848. Not quite 3 years later, they were again on the march, as they and their close friends, the Amasa M. Lymans, and a company of 400 journeyed over rugged, often desolate country toward California. And so it was that in 1851 a Mormon colony was founded in California, 65 miles east of Los Angeles. Although there were others ahead of them, the Mormons have been credited with being the real American pioneers of California and of having contributed greatly to its development. According to California historians, the agricultural wealth that has accrued to the state from the introduction by these Mormons of their system of irrigation can scarcely be estimated, and is a far greater contribution on their part than their assistance in the discovery of gold. Here Sarah Melissa Clark was born, and here she lived with her parents for 6 years and benefited by her close association with those serious, rugged people, for they set a good example for youth. There were no gamblers tolerated in San Bernardino, no rum sellers, no lewd characters offering vice for sale. There were no drones either. Persistent industry and intensive husbandry were the impressive features of this colony. They were industrious, peaceful citizens, sincere and earnest in their religious convictions, and had the reputation of being good neighbors and of getting along wonderfully well with the Indians. This is the early background of Sarah Melissa, or Lissy, as she was affectionately called. She grew up in a loving home with brothers and sisters around her. 2 sisters and 1 brother were born in California. Caroline Limenia, Caroline Limenia. Mary Elizabeth, who died there, and Russell Kilborn. The other 3 children, Helen Delilah, Collins Warren, and Clara Amanda, were born after the family returned to Utah. 4 of these 9 children died in infancy or early childhood. The children grew up in pioneer towns of California and Utah, surrounded by serious-minded people who loved God and tried diligently to serve Him and to do good to their fellow men. They enjoyed the wholesome community life of the pioneers, for it was not all work. There was recreation, picnics, dancing, songs, and laughter. Even a stranger from the outside was welcome to their gatherings. If he were well behaved, he was treated with the utmost hospitality. The California pioneers prospered well and were very happy when, in 1857, they were again called upon to leave their homes, this time to return to Utah. Brigham Young called for all able-bodied men to return to Salt Lake Valley to join the militia in holding off Johnson's army, which, through misunderstanding, the Mormons felt had been sent against them. Feeling the invasion entirely unnecessary and unfair, the majority of the Mormons in San Bernardino responded to the call of President Young. They sold their property at a fraction of its real value and returned to Utah to support a cause for which they lived and for which, if necessary, they were willing to die. The Daniel Porter Clarks arrived back in Utah in February 1858. Since the threat of Johnson's army had largely subsided, they did not push on to Salt Lake Valley, but settled in Parowan, where they became active, progressive members of this community. Lizzie learned at a very early age that the price of nonconformity comes high. She was only 6 years old when her family returned to Parowan, and she entered school there with the children of that pioneer town. Children of the ones who had remained in Parowan. She wore a red dress to school. Her father had brought dress materials and other supplies with them from California. Among these dress materials was a red merino. Her mother, who was an excellent seamstress and amateur dress designer, made Melissa a beautiful school dress of this red material. How different she was from the others in their plain and undyed homespun. The other children thought she was altogether too different. At recess of the first day of school, some of the children cut willows from the creek bank and whipped Melissa and called her a California sharper. A rather unhappy experience for a shy, sensitive child such as Melissa. In spite of this unfavorable beginning, she adjusted well and was soon accepted by the other children and became a part of the pioneer life around her. She was quick in school and learned all that the school had to offer. She was exceptionally good in spelling and reading, and always excelled in the spelling bees of that day. Isaiah Combs was her first teacher. He used the McGuffey readers and spellers, even now considered very good books. Melissa was taught to read and spell phonetically, and there were few words she could not pronounce and spell correctly. In fact, in later years, her children found her to be as accurate as a dictionary and much handier. The teachers she had there above the average for small towns of that time. Two of these who stand out as exceptionally good were this mentioned Josiah Combs and Lorenzo Dow Watson. This is the Lorenzo Dow who later became her husband. He said his interest in Melissa began when he noticed that she consistently stood at the head of her group in all spelling contests. Melissa was also fortunate to have a a scholastic background in her home. Her mother had taught school in Illinois for 3 years before her marriage. Only the best of English was used in the home, and Melissa was encouraged in all scholastic pursuits. Her interests in good books and current events remained with her throughout her life. And that's the picture that I started with. And the next section is making a home. This is the home that they had in Parowan for Melissa and Lorenzo. And yeah, so we'll hear more about that, their great union, and I'll talk about it later and read more later. Bye.